Today's video is sponsored by Professional Photographers of America.
Lock the doors, I'll break them down. Give me a torch, I'll hold it proud. 'Cause when I start a fire, it's never burning out. You bring the flood, but I will never drown. I'll never drown in the storm. Feel my fire rising high. In the darkness there is light. In the storm I will battle for my life. No, I won't give up the fight. In the storm.
Hey guys, today we're shooting with the Fujifilm X-T4 and I'm here with my beautiful model, Adriana. Go follow her, I'll link her down below. Let's get started.
All right, so let's do an autofocus test and see how autofocus and tracking do.
So I'm shooting and you can just do movements. You can move around, turn around. That was great.
All right, so I do want to do basically that same kind of autofocus test for video. So go ahead and walk towards me. Awesome, it looks great.
Up into the skyline, I can see the fire. Smoke's getting in your eyes. Watch us see the fire rise. Up into the skyline, I can see the fire. Smoke's getting in your eyes. Watch us see the fire rise. Watch us see the fire rise. Watch us see my fire rise.
If you're like us and you're shooting out with these incredible cameras, you want to make sure that you guys have some insurance. Now we get $15,000 free insurance coverage through our membership to PPA, which is the Professional Photographers of America. And they even have discounted rates if you need even more coverage than that. You also get so much access to anything from discounts on Apple products to rentals and courses like crazy, like 1,100 hours of courses right now. And then there's also contracts for virtually every type of photography you can think of. So if you haven't checked it out yet, go ahead and check out PPA. But really one of the best things from a business point of view is the ability to gain certifications and accredit yourself as a business photographer. And in this crazy environment, that could be the key to really standing out from some of your competition. Go ahead and check it out. The link below is going to get you $25 off. So go check it out and everything that they offer. Start separating yourself from other photographers and get insured today.
So we're back in the studio with the Fujifilm X-T4, shooting at the beach with it, which was amazing.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about this camera, what our thoughts are, what we think about the design, autofocus, that kind of thing. Let's start with design.
This is a pro-end camera officially. I mean, it's built really well. It's competing with some very high-end full-frame cameras now. So I really think that it is a camera that you really have to think of in that line. I mean, we were shooting with it for hours. If you're shooting with a wedding, it's all-day shooting.
Yeah.
I do think it's kind of a love and hate design though. There's a couple elements of it that just didn't quite feel right. And most of it kind of revolves around the grip. I mean, it grew a little bit with the bigger battery, but it still is just not very ergonomic. Doesn't fit really well in your hand.
Right, I typically shoot portrait-wise, and here I typically use my screen as well. So as I'm shooting, I felt like it kept slipping out of my hands, right? You're on the beach, it's hot, you're kind of sweaty, and it's kind of slipping out of my hands.
Yeah.
I didn't love that design about it. I love the new designs that are coming out now. They're more big and bulky, and again, people have a problem with that too. So you might like this. This might be your thing, but for me, longer fingers, it's just not the perfect design for me.
Yeah, and remember, this is actually bigger than like an A7 III, heavier as well. So it's a big camera to just be hanging on by these little tiny grips now.
Yeah.
Also, the dials on them, we love kind of that old-fashioned design.
Absolutely. I think it's nostalgic. If you're a film camera shooter, I think you would absolutely love this. It's kind of a reminiscent about, you know, the old film cameras and stuff, because it's super, oh yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. And it's super popular right now. So I think you'd love it if you like that kind of thing.
It's also built like a tank, which is helpful. Fully metal build everywhere, and rubberized grips just about everywhere else. I will say that you do have controls for like shutter, Your ISO as well in the top. Aperture is either controlled by the lens if you have a lens with an aperture adjustment, or via the back wheel. So you're kind of just switching back and forth all the time. And then the joystick on the back is also really small. The custom buttons as well. We do love that it has tons of customization on there. We always love that. But these buttons are so hard to find.
Yeah, it's like really a Where's Waldo situation. It's quite hard.
And very small to press. So that's kind of a negative. Now, flip screen is here, and that's a big addition because if you're self-shooting or anything like that, it's great. And then also you managed to scratch up about every screen we have.
So when I shoot weddings, I throw my cameras in my bag. I'm always have it on my side, on my strap, and it's scratching against surfaces all the time. It just is. And so I love that I can flip this back, without worrying about coming home and Dan seeing my newly scratched camera on the back. It's a great design. I love that.
Yeah, so even if you're not interested in self-shooting, I still like being able to do this before you throw it in your bag. It's nice for keeping it protected as well.
So while shooting on the beach, it's bright, there's sun reflecting everywhere, and I want to make sure that I am getting a good image, right? And I loved the screen brightness on this camera. I felt absolutely thrilled with how my images came out, and it was true to what the settings were on the camera. That's a big deal for me.
Yeah, I got a resolution upgrade as well. Also, we have a bigger battery, which is really helping things out. Although they didn't include a battery charger in the box, so you're USB charging it. Kind of a cheap move there. But I mean, overall, it's an amazing camera, but can it compete into the full frame market?
Yeah.
Because that's really where this is priced against.
Right, that's my big question, right? APS-C versus full frame, and you can do a whole video on that alone. I want to give my client the best image quality possible.
So we are still using the same sensor as the X-T4, which is a 26 megapixel sensor. However, the reality of shooting with it tells a completely different story because the images coming out of this are just amazing.
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing, all right, I'm gonna say the biggest thing that impressed me about this camera, the highlight fall off was insane. I have never, and I'm gonna say this wholeheartedly, no going back, I wholeheartedly have not shot with a camera that is as good as this camera with highlight fall off. I typically shoot in very harsh light. I love sun flare, as you guys know, I'm sure, and I love shooting with direct sunlight on my models. And this camera, there was no disparity between light and dark. It was the most smooth fall off because when I edit, I do add a lot of contrast, which can bring my blacks all the way down, right, in my image. And this camera did not crush my blacks. It was amazing. I was so impressed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care what the dynamic range numbers are. When you have that gentle roll off, it just makes it so much better.
Yes.
And then also you have all those film simulation modes and JPEG simulation modes. So they're really useful. I mean, usually on cameras like this, it's just a big gimmick, but these actually looked really good.
Yeah, absolutely. He set me up so that I could go through all the image profiles, and I absolutely loved it. I think it's a great option for somebody who's not necessarily obsessed with editing like I am, and it's super easy. You just go in the menu system and click each one, and you can see which one fits your style best. I absolutely loved it, and I'm actually going to use it probably more often.
Yeah. Now, compared to full frame, I did throw this against the A7 III and low light, and you can see a difference. So full frame is still the winner here when it comes to low light especially, but for everything else, I think the Fujifilm does a great job of holding its own for an APS-C camera.
Absolutely.
Also, the shutter has been completely redesigned. It now has 300,000 actuations that it's rated for, which is like pro level specs right there. It is also the quietest shutter we have ever used. I mean, it is almost as silent as like quiet modes on most cameras. Like,
oh yeah.
That's it. You can barely hear this thing. It is unbelievably quiet. I thought it was a E-shutter the entire time.
Yeah.
And then also it is incredible in the frame rate. So 15 frames per second in mechanical, 20 frames per second in electronic. And if you don't mind throwing a little bit of a crop on it, it is actually 30 frames per second on that, which is crazy. The only thing on there is that the buffer doesn't quite keep up with those high-end specs, so about 35 to 40 images is about the roll of the buffer. But shooting with it,
I didn't really really have many problems. I found that the buffer did not fill up too fast. And again, I laid down on my shutter. When I am shooting, like I shoot like that because I want to get that one image, that one time where the hair blows just perfectly, right? And I had no issues at all.
And the reason why is because the buffer is clearing insanely fast. So like 2 seconds, even if you filled up that buffer in 2 seconds, you can shoot that 15 frames per second again.
Oh, yeah.
It clears remarkably fast. So even compared to a lot of other cameras on the market that have larger buffers on there before filling up, this clears so fast that unless you're just holding it down at 30 frames per second, you will not have an issue with that at all.
Not at all. So autofocus is actually a big deal to me. Given I shoot portraits, right? I'm with models all the time. I shoot weddings. Autofocus is a big deal. Now, Fujifilm has always had great autofocus performance, especially after some firmware updates that came through for the X-T3. And now it's even been boosted better for the X-T4, which is a big deal. And it shows itself through these amazing images. Now, there are 425 points all over the frame with face and eye detection. Now, while shooting, I did notice a few were out of touch, but honestly, this system did amazing. Now, Sony has always been ahead of the game when it comes to eye autofocus, but Fujifilm, it's second. It's right there alongside with it, and I think it did a great job.
All right, so we're gonna talk video right here, and that is because the X-T series has been really one of my favorite cameras for video for a long time now. And that is because, honestly, Canon, Sony, Nikon, they can't even compete with the X-T3, and then here we have the X-T4. So pretty much game over for them. You're talking about 4K, up to 60 frames per second, 200 megabits per second, 10-bit log shooting, all that kind of stuff. There's a small crop if you're shooting 60 frames per second, but at 30 frames per second, full frame, DCI, up to 400 megabits per second, and again in that 10-bit mode. So there is so much packed into this camera right here. The menu system is a little bit complicated just because there's so much in there. It could be a little bit better organized, but you get used to it after a little while, and I have no problem because there's just so much that is in this camera that makes it incredible. Even 1080p got a bump up to 240 frames per second. Small hit in quality when you get to that mode, and then also you do have that crop, that 1.3x crop in that mode as well. However, they even have a menu feature for just leaving the crop factor on all the time. So as you're changing modes, you don't have to deal with that change in focal length. So specs here are amazing, but actually shooting with the camera even got a little bit better. So now we have IBIS built into the camera, and that's incredible because for a while Fujifilm said that it was going to be impossible to integrate it into their cameras, but it is here both with a normal mode, and then you can also use it with the image stabilization if you have it built into the lens, and digital image stabilization to give you really gimbal-like image stabilization. And it worked really well. I was very impressed with using it either with the 23, which comes out to about a 35 millimeter, or we used it with this 56 millimeter, which came out to about an 85, and you can get some really nice shots with that. And also you do have the flip screen on now, and the flip screen is actually pretty good because it is getting a resolution upgrade and it's really easy to see in low light. Also, you do have that battery upgrade as well. This thing still chews through batteries, so talking about a little bit less than 2 hours of shooting on a single battery, but that's still way better than before, and now it's much more usable. But probably the main thing again is going to be the image quality, and it really just looks incredible. The colors look awesome, just like what we were talking about with photos. The highlight roll off again in video is just incredibly soft. I don't care what the dynamic range is, it just makes it look unbelievable. I have no problem pushing these files a lot more than other cameras, and just no matter what you're shooting, it really looked much more cinematic and more like a high-end camera than your typical DSLR or mirrorless cameras for that. There are some really practical upgrades as well, so you can now shoot redundancy to both cards for video. So that can help you if you have a corrupt file or something like that in one card, which I actually have had with the Sony Tough cards that have just been recalled. I have no issues with that with this camera because I have a backup in there. Also, the headphone jack has been removed. However, you can use the USB-C port with an adapter, which it comes with as a headphone jack. It's a little inconvenient, but I didn't mind it too much. The benefit there is you can actually get a mic volume in or a line volume in. So if you're hooking this up to a soundboard, you won't have any issues. Also, I found that the files played back incredibly smooth on my computer. So 4K 60 was actually playing back much more smooth than like 4K 30 on a Sony camera. And that's because the way they're using the compression, those higher bit rates are really helping for decoding that footage later on your computer. Now we do need to talk about autofocus because I was expecting some really great things from the X-T4 and I've really been disappointed so far. I've been changing settings because there's a lot of customization as well and I still haven't been able to get a great result. It's very jumpy, sporadic, it's not smooth. It will lock on, it is quick. However, it just kind of hunts in and out at first and it's very jumpy. It locked on the background a couple of times while the model was coming towards me. So it's been good in certain instances, but a lot of times it just isn't as smooth as like Canon or Sony have been in the past. And so I really expected something better from this. So either Fuji could really do something with the algorithms on this one, or some of it might be these lenses too. This is the 23mm 1.4, 56mm 1.2. These are Fuji's best lenses, prime lenses right now, but they're old and they're very loud as well. So if you're using them for video, very loud autofocus. Their newer lens are kind of more the cheaper, less expensive, not as wide of an aperture, but that might be contributing a little bit to how these lenses are kind of hunting back and forth. Now the only other big bummer for me is going to be that there's a record limit at 30 minutes for this camera, and a lot of other cameras have been going away from that since the tax expired, so I'm not really sure why it's here, but unfortunately you're still dealing with a record limit for video on this. So there's definitely nothing better in the APS-C world than this camera right here. It really is the best that we have on that one. However, price-wise, we're really closing in on some full-frame cameras and some really good full-frame cameras. So the question is, like, can this really compete with those? And I mean, I love the mechanical aspect of it. It's a beautiful looking camera. It's built like a tank. So there's a lot of things to love about this. Yeah. But does it really come close to full frame?
Yeah, that's my only question. That would be the only reason why I wouldn't completely switch to the X-T4, right? I'm shooting full frame. I want to be able to deliver the best quality images to my clients. And, you know, does it compete? And I think you guys can answer that for yourselves, and as well, I think it could be another video. But I loved, again, the highlight fall off, unbelievable autofocus. It is competing with some really good cameras.
And you do have some things that most other cameras won't give you, like that faster frame rate and the great shutter. And there's a lot of things that would be beneficial to this camera versus some of the others. And then the big kind of pull through for me is going to be video. Nothing else is really going to come close to this for video. And so whether you're using it as like a dedicated camera or just a hybrid shooter, I mean, it's so easy just to switch one dial and go from photo to video. So if you're a hybrid shooter on here, this might be the camera to get because it's really giving you the best of that photo and video world.
Yeah, I mean, I can attest to Dan loving video in this because, you know, I'd walk in his office and I would hear some noises coming out. But anyways, thanks guys for watching. We really enjoyed doing this review for you guys. If you have any comments or questions, let us know down below.